Welcome to The Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Studios, Rochester, New York, Mouth Off at RockVox, rockvox.com. Having enjoyed an almost 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of the helping conversation, your host, Executive and Recovery Coach, Keith Greer.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. And thank you for making the time to sit in with us on the helping conversation. Very excited about our conversation today on a variety of levels, just who our guest is, how she came to be connected to me through a relationship in my life from a long time ago. So that was really nice, and it'll be another wonderful conversation about how this specific person engages others in helping them move their lives forward. So let's get rolling. So would you join me in welcoming to the helping conversation, Erin Lindstrom? Good morning, Erin.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm thrilled you're here and able to join us from North Carolina, right?
Virginia, actually.
Virginia. Okay.
So
Virginia.
very close. Yep.
All right. Good. Well, thank you. Well, let me fill everybody in a little bit on who Erin is, and we'll jump into hearing more about what she does and how she does it. So Erin Lindstrom is a sales strategist and money mindset coach. We're going to talk a lot about that, for sure, because I love that title, for online business owners. And she is the founder of Human Being Club, which is a network of conscious humans to collect, connect, and collaborate. Erin helps her clients achieve their life and business goals with a blend of down-to-earth spiritual tools and practical techniques. When she's not helping her clients make more impact or more income, you can find Erin playing with her two adorable kids, performing on stage at Push Comedy Theater, or Zoom at the moment, as we all know, or having a long conversation about life and the universe on her front porch in Norfolk, Virginia. So again, Erin, thank you for making the time.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
And as we were just talking about, which I'm sure so many of our listeners can relate to, as the mom of two children trying to negotiate school during this time of COVID, it was even a little bit dicey as to whether you're going to be able to join me today.
Every moment we're living on the edge.
Well, thank you. And I'll thank your children for being wherever they needed to be so that their mom could sit in with us.
Yeah, it is a community production of making it all work. So we're doing a homeschool pod right now, and it really shows how we're all on a team. You know what I mean?
That's great. So this is multiple families and this is something you just all created and said, let's put our heads together and our resources together so we can get our kids educated and keep our sanity.
Yeah, so all of our kids are enrolled in public schools, but Virginia and Norfolk specifically decided to close schools for 9 weeks and be totally virtual because we all have to work. We decided to come together, and so all the kids are together every day, and one parent kind of rotates in. That way, everyone else can go to work and do what they need to do.
So it's how many parents or how many families?
It's 6 families and 8 kids.
So once every 6 days, each family's responsible?
It's basically, yes. We have one day that overlaps, so there's a little extra help, but pretty much one day a week, you're on, and good luck.
All right, that works, right? That works.
Yeah, so far so good.
All right, wonderful. As I was saying to you before we came on the air, having children in their late 20s, I am so thankful to not be where you are right now of figuring out how to do this COVID thing and have my kids be in school.
Yeah, I was talking to my 87-year-old grandmother the other day, and I was like, Nana, I'm sure every generation has something like this, right? And she was like, no. I was like, oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah, right. That'll feel good when you get to the other end of it.
Right.
To be able to say, I lived through this. Right.
Yeah.
So I always ask our guests when they come on to just give a quick synopsis of how you got to where you are in facilitating your specific brand of the helping conversation.
Sure. So Let's see, many years ago in a faraway place called New York. I was born and raised there, and I was kind of a kid who always had questions that I don't think my mom necessarily knew what to do with. So we would be in the back of the car, and I remember sitting in the back seat, and we were talking about the Yankees, and I was like, why do baseball players make so much money, but teachers don't? Like they're just playing a game. And she was like, that's a great question. Like moving on. And I had questions like, well, what, like if poor people don't have any money, then like, how do we help them? And she's like, please, like, thank you so much for your question. Like we need, do your homework. Like, and then I had another question, which was like, okay, so wait, there's kids who need to be adopted. Like what are they doing right now? And then we got the internet, and I would be online looking at the, registry of kids up for adoption and being like, Mom, can we please, like, I'll take care of the baby. Like, can you just sign the papers? And she was like, Erin, like, no, I'm doing everything I can to like take care of you and your brother right now. I do not have the capacity for more, but those questions were very alive in me. Right. And so even growing up and going to, high school, I think my heart really wanted to drop out or not go to college and waitress and like just kind of pop around the world and see what the world had to offer and figure it out. And the messaging I got was get an education and then you can do whatever you want. Get an education, get a good job, then you have to pay off your loan. So it became this whole thing, right, of do this and then this and then this. And I did a lot of that. I did go to college. I did get my bachelor's degree. And then I started a master's in nonprofit management. And I loved the business piece of the puzzle. I loved the leadership aspects. And when it came to like the money and the business stuff, I couldn't find peace in the fact that you can run a nonprofit and make very little money. But if you ran a business that did whatever in the world, you could make a ton of money.
Right.
And so I kind of had this discrepancy that I didn't feel good with. And I couldn't, I have student loans. I have 6 figures of student loans. And so continuing with my master's meant that I was going further into debt. So I decided to pause and kind of figure out like, all right, hold on. Who am I? What do I want to do? And also I had a lot of, kind of like childhood trauma and recent adult child trauma kind of come up that I needed to deal with. So at the time I was living in London and I moved back to Boston where I went to college and I went to therapy. I ended up hiring my first coach. And through that relationship with my first coach, I learned about this world of holistic health and that it's more than just the food you eat. It's about your relationships and spirituality and everything that you're bringing into your life. And through that, I was like, oh, this is everything I believe. And it's kind of off the beaten track. So I asked her where she went to school and I ended up going to the same coaching program that she went to. And from there, I stepped into the business world to actually grow my business. And then I sort of had this like Venn diagram experience where there was the business stuff and the coaching stuff. And to me, everything really overlapped. That centerpiece of the Venn diagram was huge.
Right.
And so that's really how like the sales strategy and money mindset all come together, because I think it's so interesting how what we believe is possible, like we're then creating that. And when you're creating a business, it's really important that you take a look at that so you can create more and actually hit your goals.
Awesome. So you've already, before we jump back to another question, I just want to highlight, you've already hit on, at least for me, some of those foundational aspects that guide most really effective helping conversations. One, recognizing somewhere in your life that you had to do your own work.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're the only tool in the room, right? We don't have a toolbox of saws and hammers. We're the tool. And you talked about this holistic perspective of seeing a human being in all their contexts and addressing all of their different needs. And those two things just so resonate with me as some of the pieces that I think about a lot in doing a helping conversation, especially that doing your own work part.
Seriously, no one else can do it for you. So it becomes this thing of like, you have to want it enough to make a move.
Right. I've always found myself, and I would say this is true, having spent parts of my career in the clinical world and parts of my career in the coaching world, I've always found it very interesting when I've run into people who do either of those, who I've always said don't have any problem selling mental health, but have difficulty buying it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? Like I'll do it, but ask me to go see a therapist, see a coach, work with somebody who helps me move forward. That feels a little bit different. That's never made any sense to me.
That's so interesting. One of the things I found, I recently, I caught myself talking about someone who I'm in close relationship in my life. And what kept coming out of my mouth was like, he needs to go to therapy. He needs a therapist. Like, he really needs to work through this. And then I was like, oh my gosh, if I'm the one saying this about someone over and over again, like, I probably need to go back to therapy. and I actually did, because it's like, you can't fix anyone else in your life either. It really is like, what can I do for me to look at how I'm holding these relationships? So yeah, there's only so much we can control, and it's a very small list.
It is. I always want to give credit to where this came from, because I stole this from a very good friend and colleague of mine. She always talks about the concept of a hula hoop. Right, that if you stand up and you put a hula hoop around you, everything inside that hula hoop you are in control of. Your thoughts, your needs, your everything, your wants, your decisions. Step an iota outside of that hula hoop, and you are firmly in the land of what you're not in control of, namely other people, other people's thoughts, other people's opinions of you, right? All of that. Right.
Yeah, I'm going to take that hula hoop and pass that along.
It's so simple, but it's such a powerful picture to think, all right, as long as I stay inside my hula hoop, I'm in the land of what I can do something about. Yeah. So I'm curious, as you were talking, and knowing your mom, I can picture your mom's face when you were asking these questions for which there are no answers, right, as a little kid. I'm always really curious with helping folk. Anything else from either childhood, adolescenthood, that as you look back on it now, was no doubt about it evidence that you were going to find yourself in the helping world as an adult?
So two things pop into my mind. Number one is that having a parent who was going through AA, I went to AA meetings as a kid. I listened. I overheard many a helping conversation. The 12 steps were probably like the ground on which the parenting techniques were grown.
Right.
So just that kind of being in my backbone, like a lot of that is ingrained in me from childhood. And I have a lot of the like, give it to God.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of that is ingrained in me because those were the tools that I think, my parent was giving herself and then gave to her kids. Right.
Right.
And the other side of that is I always was very drawn to kids. Like I just loved kids. I'm a natural with kids. And I was the oldest of 16 cousins. And so I babysat everyone. And while that is one sort of relationship where you can really see like, oh, this little person who doesn't think terrible things about themselves or the world. And like, that's such a gift. And on the other side of that, there were the parents of the kids. Right. And many times with the moms, for whatever reason, like we would have deep conversations because I was there and I wasn't her partner and I was kind of like not involved in anything. And so they would just share things with me. And so I heard a lot. And I think I really learned to hold space through that because I was just like, and a little bit encouraging, but also like, I'm 15, so I can't help you with anything.
Right.
But that's kind of like all of that still feels like very much what I'm doing.
Yeah. I love that concept of holding space. I talk about that all the time when I work with coaches and clinicians of just that concept and the importance of that concept and the complexity of that concept of holding space for another human being. But the other thing, this just popped into my head as you talked about that you've always had this natural way with kids. When I think of people I've known through my career who are really good with kids and teens, one of their primary skills was that they were inherently totally authentic because you can't bullshit kids.
Totally.
Right? So if you don't come into the room with total authenticity about who you are, good luck trying to do any work with a kid or a teenager.
Yeah. And you know what I love about them too is that like they don't care about your job. They don't care how much money is in your bank account. Yeah. They don't care that like you woke up and hated yourself this morning. If you're showing up and playing a game with them, then you are a hero.
Right.
And they can be so present in that I think it's kind of healing because like they hold space in a way too. That's like, oh, thanks. They can just see you with none of the BS on the side.
Right. I tell this story often in my 30 years of doing school social work. How many times one of my students would say to me somewhere, God, Mr. Greer, your job's so easy. All you do is sit around and listen. Right. And
Yep.
you can totally see through the eyes of some 14-year-old how that's exactly how it looks. Right. All I'm doing is sitting around and listening. Yeah. Right. So, their authenticity met with our authenticity.
Yep.
That's
right,
great.
Right.
So along the way, Erin, as you have moved through the different directions you've gone professionally, who have been some mentors that have helped shape the type of work you do today?
My first real mentor, I would say, was in college. I pursued a professor to do an independent study with her. Her name was, it still is, Dr. Holly Carter. And she was in like the international education, which again, those Venn diagrams come up for me a lot. So I was studying international affairs in elementary education and really looking at like, how can we eradicate poverty through education? And she had helped Oprah like build the school for children in South Africa. And I was like, hi, I'm Erin. Please, may I do anything you're doing? Like, help me, teach me. I'll do anything. And she was like, that's really nice. Bye. And I was like, it took a while to get a meeting with her. I think, I don't know. She just wasn't really open to it. But I was persistent and
Yes.
I showed up again and I was like, I really care, like in a level that you may or may not have seen before. Like, teach me anything. And I ended up going to South Africa with her. She really took me under her wing and we led a teacher training program there. And being with her, and obviously I can't see the world through her eyes, but just having her experience and her knowledge and like her mentorship was really incredible and life-changing for me.
Right.
And then from there, I think that first coach that I had was also very important to me. It's always interesting because I feel like coaches and mentors, there's the work we're focused on together, but then there's also who they are as people that also kind of shifts you and changes you.
Sure.
And so those have been the most important, I would say, as far as like real typical mentors. And then I also have like peers that I work with, and I actually host like a peer mastermind situation.
Right.
And the women in that group who are also building their businesses and have some of this education around mindset, like it's been the most incredible thing to walk with them for the last 3 years, supporting each other.
Yeah.
And really being able to see each other, to celebrate the wins, because sometimes it's uncomfortable to have good things happen just as much as it is to have the bad things.
Right.
And so each of them kind of has been a mentor in their own like unique way.
Right. I'm curious about something. So I'm going to ask a bit of a personal question.
Let's do it.
How old were you when you hired that first coach?
I was, I want to say 22 or 23.
All right. So that blows me away. That at 22, 23, you had the wherewithal to recognize, boy, for me to take it to the next level, I need to work with somebody. But then there's the other thing that just popped into my head that I'm curious what your answer would be. How did you decide to hire a coach versus go see a therapist?
Great question. So, when you say it like that, I'm like, oh yeah, that is weird. But because it was my path, like it happened organically, where I was pretty depressed when I moved back from London after I stopped my master's. And so I was kind of exploring like, who am I? What am I doing? Why am I alive? All of this stuff. And one of the things I was doing, I was listening to Jason Mraz a lot, who is an artist. And he had a blog, and he's a very profound writer and kind of sees things through this like very conscious lens. And as I was following him, he mentioned Trisha, who is my coach. And so I kind of experienced her through his eyes first, then clicked and went down like a little like portal and started learning about her. And I attended a webinar that she did. And I was like, I jive with her and I do want this support. So I went for it.
Right.
As far as coaching or therapy, I was actually in therapy when I hired the coach.
Okay.
So I did both.
Okay. So I know my definition of the difference between the two. So if you could give a pretty quick thumbnail definition according to Erin Lindstrom of the difference between being in a coach conversation or in a more traditional therapeutic conversation, what would your answer be?
So for me, therapists are trained in going back, and coaches focus more on the here and now. And there might be things touching the now, but it's less about unpacking all of the things and more about looking in what is here right now and how can we change and shift that. Right.
All right. Beautiful. I always think about, I refer to it as the temporal quality of the two conversations, the past to the present, more traditional therapeutic, present to the future coaching.
Yeah,
right.
That makes sense. I also have a few different certifications and different healing modalities.
Yep.
So I tend to bring some of those in. And so I usually tell my clients when they start with me, I am a mashup. I am part healer, part coach, and part strategist. And you kind of get all of me depending on what we're doing.
Awesome. So that statement fits perfectly into what my next question was going to be, or will be, which is, in your unique helping conversation, what are some of the modalities, models, theories that guide your work as a coach?
That's a great question. So again, I feel like this is kind of a mashup because from doing this for like 10 years, I feel like I have taken from so many different places. What everything kind of starts with me is like an open, honest, and like trusting communication, right? So no matter what I'm doing, it's I break the fourth wall in a way and talk to people. And I'm just like, hi, let's be awkward for a minute. and we'll kind of get into it. And to me, it's really built around like trust, presence. I am very casual in the way that I speak about things. So I'll ask people to word vomit because usually they come to me with something they want to talk about.
Right.
And so I'll be like, go ahead and tell me. Like, I can hold space, I can listen, and I'm not judging what you're saying. That's not what this is about.
Right.
And once they kind of empty, then we can go in different directions, depending on what do you want to get out of this is another question. And I also ask people, how do you want to feel at the end of the session?
Right. That, what do you want to walk away with? Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Because there's usually like a tangible thing that they want, especially when we're dealing with like business stuff.
Right.
And the journey to getting there rarely has anything to do with the thing that they're trying to accomplish.
Right. So I want to ask you to maybe go a little bit deeper in around how you in that moment of holding space, focus very specifically on the creation of trust and safety. I just was in with a client earlier today, a middle manager at a company, and that was the entire conversation around her growing recognition of just assuming that when she sits in a conversation with someone and they know each other, trust and safety is there. And her growing recognition that that's not necessarily so. So when you first engage with a human being, what are some of the either thoughts you're having, directions you go in that really invites a primary initial focus on the creation of trust, safety, and inclusion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's interesting because most people, when we're having that first coaching conversation, we've had some interaction to lead us there.
Right.
And so even in that, I actually think that is all trust building along the way. Whether we're looking at marketing or just meeting people, leading a team, like it's all the same thing, right? Every once in a while, I do get someone where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a blind date. Hi. And I really do start with like calling out the awkwardness by doing something like that. And then I create a safe space by listening and not just like run of the mill listening, but I'm actively listening in a way where I always think it's funny when people thank me at the end of things. They're like, that was so helpful. I'm like, you're welcome, but I listened. You know what I mean? Like that was all you. Like they can figure it out once they have the space to do it in. Yeah.
But isn't listening, I would argue, is for us helping folks, that's one of our superpowers.
100%.
And I'm always, because I know I'm guilty of this, like what you just said, when your client thanks you, and the tendency to sometimes say, well, I just listened. And I challenge myself now and others, can we jettison the word just from that statement? Because we minimize the impact of listening, the complexity of listening, the skill of listening. Because some days that's it.
Yes, that's so true. And I think the other side of that too is listening is 100. You also have to know how to ask the right questions.
Yes.
And so I think that's something I'm pretty good at this point, asking open-ended questions to let people explore, also noticing what people stay away from and then asking something gently around that. And I would say the most important thing that I do when I'm asking questions is I get consent as I go.
Yes.
So I'm
permission.
I am consistently asking people, hey, like, would it be okay if I asked you about this? And they'll be like, yes. And then I'll move forward. Yeah. And to me, that like building trust and actually making sure I have buy-in as I go and that they're comfortable is one of the most important things.
So I want to ask just to follow up on something you just said, because to me, it's so brilliant, is that you notice what people stay away from.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I notice when I ask a question, a lot of times I'll ask big questions. I want to know who you are, how you got here and what do you want?
Right.
And particularly that last one, what do you want? It's hard for people to answer.
Right.
We tend to look at what we don't have or what we're trying to do, but it's hard. And like, so to look at the buffet of life and be like, I'll have this and this and this, it's uncomfortable. So number one, just kind of knowing what's hard for people typically. And then number two, when I get an answer that's very earth-based or very what you typically want to hear, what a parent might want to hear from their child, I just kind of like hold space for like, okay, cool. So assume all of that's done. It might be money centered where they're trying to pay the bills and that's their goal. And I'm like, cool, assume your bills are paid. Now what do you want?
Right.
And so kind of just like, okay, let's go a little bigger. Let's zoom out and kind of going in that way. I find it's fascinating to know people on that level.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you would agree with this. I just find myself often, I don't know if the word is amazed. Probably the better word would be saddened at how small people think of themselves, how difficult it is for them to think big, right? To answer those big questions because no one has ever invited them and or given them permission to actually think big about themselves. And so you find yourself in adulthood with this kind of narrow scope of how you think about yourself or where you could go. And, you know, it sounds like that's one of the real gifts you give is big.
Yeah,
right?
Big. And like big can mean different to other people. Big might be like living on the lake and you're doing some work because you love it.
Right.
So it can look however you want. But I think we're so focused on that safety and security.
Yeah.
And we've been taught, it's in our blood that like working 9 to 5, Monday through Friday until you're 65 is the way to do that.
Yeah.
And the truth is like it benefits certain people for you to believe that.
Right.
So it's kind of revolutionary for you to think outside the box and be like, oh, they make money. They're not at work all day, every day because they have a team that supports them. What if I had support?
Yeah.
But then we have all of the messaging around like you needing support as a mom. Now you're a bad person.
Right.
Like, or you're a bad mom.
Right.
So there's so much unpacking here of like just what I think the media and advertising has done to us over the years that I just do a lot of like, okay, what if this wasn't true? And kind of figuring out what's really there.
That is such a gift because you know we all know that all of us human beings have that wonderful self-critic in our head, right? So the minute we think big, that self-critic screams and it puts up all the reasons why we can't or shouldn't, often shouldn't. I think, all that kind of moralistic piece to it. You're a good person, not a good person. So to ask some questions that invite people to consider, if nothing was in your way,
right?
Where would you go? What would you do? And what would it look like?
Yeah. And to that point with the inner critic, I think it's so important to have relationships in your life where you can talk through things and look or imagine the bigger picture.
Right.
And so whether that's with a coach, a therapist, like whoever you're working with, and then that container of like the friends that I'm sort of building businesses in tangent with, like having a group of people around you who are committed to thinking bigger and doing the work of like figuring out what to do, I think can be life-changing.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just reading an article this morning and it's a little off topic, but I think it's really relevant.
Yeah.
The article was talking about the challenges us human beings have making changes to our behavior when our health is on the line. So, weight loss, hypertension, diabetes, things like that. And this one piece of research was talking about the fact that it appears that only 1/5 of people are able to create change and sustain it. And it just talked about how difficult it seems to be for us to, I interpret this, to move in a different direction than where we are right now. And that part feels wholly relevant to our work as coaches because we're supporting people in maybe moving in a different direction. And it seems to be pretty darn difficult for us human beings.
Definitely. Well, I think it's really scary because even if you're in a situation that's not ideal right now, the challenges that you're facing every day. So there's not an element of surprise except, the fact that we're living in 2020. But for the most part, like you have a sense of this is my hard and at least I know it.
Right.
So when you take a step to try something different, to be someone different and to become and grow, then you don't know what challenges are going to face. And I think it's our natural instinct to just keep ourselves safe.
Right.
And sometimes safe means knowing our challenges. So it's a lot to step into something new because you're becoming someone else. And not only are you changing the thing you're trying to change, but the relationships change around you. The way you communicate changes, like you become a new person.
Right.
So even though it's what you want, there's like a death involved as well.
Yeah. Right. Moving somewhere new is both exciting and a bit of a mourning process, possibly too.
Definitely. There is grief. Even when you're accomplishing your goals, like, there's still scary stuff, and that doesn't go away.
Yeah.
I think you just get better at dealing with it.
So before we jump into some more specifics about the exact kind of coaching that you do, I always love asking my guests, because such a part of what we do is helping people is to support people in identifying their strengths and to truly being strength-based. So tell me, what are some of your strengths, personal or professional strengths, positive attributes, positive characteristics, the things that Erin would say are her gifts to the world?
Yeah, thank you for asking. My gifts to the world. So I'm very good at listening, as we mentioned, right? And holding space. I think that is really powerful. And you're right that we tend to do the just thing with it. Like, it's huge. The other thing is, I am a visionary. So I see possibility. And usually when people start sharing something with me, I see the next 5 steps.
Yeah.
And I can jump ahead 5 steps and then strategize backwards, which I think can be very, very helpful for someone who's like, but I don't know how. Right. It's like, oh, but I can help you figure it out.
Right.
And so there's a sense of possibility there. And then the other piece of the puzzle, I'm told I'm quite inspiring. And I think that's really an energetic thing more than anything. Like, I start conversations, whether they're sales calls, whether they're coaching calls, whether I'm hosting retreats. Like, my energy is important to me because I know it affects the people around me and myself.
Right.
And so I think it is a gift for people to show up intentionally in positive energy. And that doesn't mean being happy every day or every minute, or that life's not hard. It just means remembering too that, like, oh, I have gifts and I'm here. How can I support you?
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. So fill us in a little bit more on this concept of money mindset coach.
Sure.
All right. So maybe a little bit of who you work with. What are some of the topics talked about? And that so resonates with me because one of my guests in my first season, who happens to be my sister, she is a portfolio manager for high net worth families. And so we've been in this conversation for years about the vulnerability of that specific conversation about money for most people. It is not an easy conversation. So I'm so curious about how you do your conversation around that.
Yeah. So money is such an interesting thing. And I think it's interesting because as kids, we look to our parents for safety. And as adults, we look to money for safety. So a lot of what we learned in our parental relationships is copied and pasted over into money without us even realizing.
Right.
We also learn a lot about how to talk about money, what's appropriate, what is cheap, what is expensive. Like, we have all these definitions. And then as you are... Typically, I'm working with women who are stepping into the business world and going from making maybe $30,000 a year to $300,000 a year and beyond, like really building businesses and having a level of money that they've really never had before. And many of them are the first in their families to have money. So with all of that, there's a lot that gets stuck up in there. And while it's people come to me because they want to, typically they come with the problem of sales, and then we move into money, and money is all trust stuff and relationships based.
Right.
So it's really, it's fascinating because so much of what we learned is just from other pieces of our lives. And I think that whether you're building a business or you're growing a career or a family and parenting, like, those are the biggest personal development projects. And all of it crosses over.
Right.
So with those conversations, I typically meet people where they are. So it's a little bit of like, okay, where are you and where do you want to be? And what's coming up for you around that? And many times it's about asking for money. Like, it feels slimy, sleazy. We just have a negative connotation with asking for things and then receiving. And much of that is like, if you were a child and your parents were like, again, coming back to women, just because I work with them most of the time, some little girls are told, like, you're meant to be seen and not heard.
Right.
If you have feelings, like, go to your room. And then when you step into growing a business and leadership, I'm asking you to show up and serve and be seen.
Right.
And so there's a lot of unlearning that happens there. And then the receiving is a big part of it as well, because we're taught that, like, receiving is bad. And we've also learned many times that it's not safe. So if we look at all of the different power dynamics in our relationships, some of us had parents were growing up, you were given an allowance. And then if you messed up at school or talked back, that would be taken
away.
Some people would be given gifts, same thing, taken away. Some things like it's just all of the good, bad stuff comes up and we put that on money.
Right.
So it's really just a healing opportunity to talk about what's coming up. What do we make money mean? Because at the end of the day, money is a tool. You know what I mean? It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't really care whose hand it's in or whose bank account it's in. We just make these huge stories around it. So my work is really like getting clear on what stories do you have around it? What stories would you like? What would serve you?
Yeah.
And then what do we need to do to shift that?
Can you give maybe an example from your work with some of the folks of the difference between a story that I have about money when I walk in to first start working with you that maybe has held me back, and what that new story might sound like as I walk away with a greater sense of clarity around my relationship with money?
Yeah. So most of the time, like one of the most common ones is I just feel bad asking them for money. So the story there is like, it's bad that I ask for money. It means something poor about me. And the other side of that is like, after a conversation, I want you to see and feel that it is of service for you to ask for money, because you and your whatever you're doing in the world to exchange money for is of service to the world.
Right.
Whether you're creating art because this is what you're here to do, or if you're helping someone do something else, right? Like it is an energetic exchange. And in order for the other person to receive what you're giving, there needs to be a back and forth.
Right.
So that's actually how it's supposed to work. Like you're in flow when you're giving and receiving.
Yeah.
And just having or hoarding, like that's not helping anyone either.
Right. Is there any part of the I feel bad about asking for money that has to do with either I'm not worthy or what I do is not worthy?
100%.
Okay.
So most of the time, I think people can get themselves to the level of like, I know I'm really good at this, but it still doesn't feel good. And that's where they kind of get stuck. Like it still doesn't feel good. And most of the time when you feel like it's not enough, they want to add more things to their package. Like, oh, let's add more calls for this, or let's add a bigger painting and I'll take longer and That when I hear like, it's not enough, my brain goes to, oh, you think you are not enough.
Yeah.
Because it is that core wounding. And like some people will say to like charge your worth in your price. And I don't believe that, because your worth is infinite.
Right.
And like, that's not on the table with any of this.
Right.
But you're the only person who can know your worth. Like
that's a really interesting concept, because I think most people would equate worth with a dollar amount, and you're making it a much bigger word and a much bigger concept in our lives.
Yeah. You're worthy of living a life where you have joy.
Right.
You're worthy of an opportunity to use your gifts to bless the world.
Right. Right. I so relate to this because I know, as someone who, grew up with quotes around the term, grew up in the helping world, in the social work world. I grew up getting those messages that you do this work because it's the right thing to do. You do this work because it feels good in your heart. You don't even think about doing a whole lot of complaining, or at least complaining publicly about what you get in terms of compensation. And when I moved into coaching and started to be exposed to a very different narrative about how you do your business and how you assign some value to what you do, it was really hard. That was a really hard shift for me to get to a level of comfort of saying, this is the compensation level that I charge for what I do. Because the other part of it, Erin, that seems to be, there's no perfect mathematical equation, right, to figure this out.
Nope, there's not. I think there's the market, you know what I mean, and what it will hold.
Right.
And then there's like, what feels good to you? And what would, looking at your time, we do know the, like how valuable our work is, but that's different than how valuable we are as humans.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you can put a number on that. And then you need to kind of build up the gusto to confidently speak that.
Yeah.
And to really believe that like, this is legit. Like I believe in this wholeheartedly because I know the results you're going to see.
Right. Right. What are some of the types of entrepreneurs, business people that you work with?
So it's a wide range. I have a lot of them are starting their own coaching practices.
Okay.
Some of them, there's dance teachers. I've worked with chiropractors, orthodontists. It's really, really the full gamut. I have teachers and people who are crossing over from corporate into starting their own business.
Right.
Is very common. But most of the time they are trying to sell something without being quote unquote at work.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Something that allows them to do what they're doing from home.
Yeah.
Some time freedom in their lives.
Exactly. Many of the women, and actually men too, who come to me like are raising kids and don't want to just see them for an hour every night.
Right.
Like there's this new generation, maybe kind of just seeing things as like, oh, well, if this is what's most important to me, how do I want to show up for them? And oh no, the world as we know it, like doesn't really set you up for success in that.
Right.
And so with the kind of value shift there, I think people are really looking at, oh, what can I do differently? How can I still make money, but also spend time with my family or doing what I love or whatever that is for them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember one of my most favorite questions that was asked of me, that was such a mind-blowing question at the time when I started my coach training, was who would be my perfect client? Because once again, I was not raised professionally to even think about that. Mm-hmm. Who would be your perfect client?
It's interesting. I actually had a call the other day with someone that I had never seen or heard of before. And she was like, hi, I need to work with you. She knows exactly what she's trying to do, but doesn't know the how.
Yeah.
But she's inspired and excited and scared and is aware of like, she has a narcissistic mother and she knows that that's kind of showing up in how she's like trying to lead and that there's some healing to do there. That's my perfect person is like, you're not perfect. You have an idea of what you want to do.
Yeah.
You're scared and you're brave.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please walk in with some level of self-awareness.
A little bit.
Yeah. Right. Would be helpful.
100%. Yeah. And even just like, again, that can mean different things, but I think even just knowing that like, I'm scared is huge.
Right.
Like many people are just like, I don't know how. So to acknowledge the fact that like, there's a feeling here and like feelings can be shifted.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
As a helping person doing your unique helping conversation, what are, at the end of the day, the benefits to you of doing this type of work?
Oh, so I think that the way that I do coaching, I kind of consider it healing, to be honest, because it is holding space, like they are being healed.
Yes.
And when you witness someone being healed, you're being healed at the same time.
Yeah.
So I use the word shiny a lot. And for me, that's someone who's really like in their power. When you walk into a room and you're like, oh, I just really like her for some reason. I don't know what it is. Like there's the magic about someone because they're living in their purpose.
Yeah.
I feel like whether I'm doing that, whether my client's doing that, by virtue of doing that, not only are you healing yourself, but you end up like silently healing the people around you because they're given quiet permission to do the same.
Yeah.
So just by being with them and witnessing, like, God, what a joy of like being alive, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love that word witnessing. I think about that all the time, that, for us to never lose appreciation for the fact that in a moment we might be in a conversation with another human being where they are sharing things that have never seen the light of day until that moment in that conversation with you, partly due to your skill at creating that safe space. That if you can't appreciate that, oh my.
Yeah, it's such an honor.
Yes.
And like, it really is like, oh, thank you so much for sharing yourself with me. And so many times I think the things that we are keeping secret and not saying out loud, whether we don't realize it's there or we're ashamed of them, they're hidden, they're buried deep down. Like those are the things that we all have in common in some way, shape or form. Like we all have wounds. I learned at a young age, like I was walking around with a lot of like shame around family stuff.
Yep.
And I thought it was just me for a while until one friend told me something and I was like, oh, we have a club. And it became a joke that we had like the effed up families club. And then what I learned is like, oh my God, that's everyone in the world.
Yes. Oh my.
Surprise. Like no one is perfect. Like everyone has stuff because we're all humans.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have to tell you, I was just yesterday had coffee with a long time wonderful colleague, close friend, fellow social worker, She and I spent a lot of years as school social workers together, and we were having this exact same conversation. Like, who doesn't have shit in their family?
Yeah.
Right? And in an odd way, because I never want to minimize the pain that some of that stuff could be.
Right.
Can we almost celebrate it at times simply because of what you just said? Because every family has it. And yet so many people walk around still thinking my family is the only family that has it.
Totally. And I think it's such a gift too, to be in the presence of people who are doing the work, because a lot of times in your family, like, everyone's out of your control and you're not there to change them necessarily.
Right.
And that can be tragic and really, really sad. And being around people who are taking that next step and are in control. And again, it's not perfect, but they're figuring things out, making mistakes and like moving forward. It's so healing to be like, oh, okay, some people do. And it's okay that not everybody does.
Right. Right. So that's all the wonderful stuff. What are some of the challenges, some of the rigors of doing this as a professional helping person?
So that's a good question. I feel like what could be really challenging is if you didn't have boundaries. Like this really, and I feel like I've learned this over the years.
Right.
So it doesn't feel as challenging to me now, to be honest. But when you are totally open and you're working with other people who are totally open, it's easy to get stuck in that and to not come back to like earth, to be grounded and to just to get wrapped up in that. As far as like my challenges, like, I don't mean to be a pain with this question. However, I'm just like, I don't feel a ton of challenges. I feel like pretty aligned and well boundaried and like it really is a gift. And I think with the systems and support that I'm putting around myself, it feels manageable and doable. And like, it's my favorite thing to do.
Right. Right. And look, you use the key word in terms of this work either being joyous or this work being overwhelming. And that's that boundary word. That as long as we're being clear about that in our own lives, then we're probably in a pretty good place.
Yeah. And going back to the hula hoop, when a client forgets that they have a hula hoop and they're looking to you to solve a problem or putting that on you, that can be 100% doable. It requires conscious conversations, navigating the boundaries, and that 100% is challenging. So I feel like it's really important to kind of have the ground rules at just as far as like, I'm here to support you. Obviously I can't do the work, but like I've got your back 100%.
Right.
Here's what that looks like.
Right.
Like.
Beautiful. So another question I'm always curious about, and I always want to frame this because I know for me there's a distinct difference in answer to this, is there a difference between what initially attracted you to this work and what now keeps you in this work?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like it's mostly the same, but the beginning was the possibility of this being real.
Right.
And the current is like, oh, it's real. There's nothing else I would rather do in the world.
Yeah.
So just going to keep going and like figure out like, what does it look like to scale? How do I help more people? Or how do I not and feel really good about this? Like whatever it is, it's more, there's just different options because I'm fully committed at this point.
Yeah. If you had an opportunity, which I'm sure you do in your work, to talk to somebody who is thinking about making a move professionally into the helping world, whether it's specifically in coaching or therapy or whatever, or just engages in any kind of helping conversation, building a business, whatever, what would be some of your words of wisdom to them about how best to prepare and continue to hone their skills?
Yeah. So number one would be do the work yourself.
Right.
So many times, like what we want to help people with, it's like you need to commit to that fully and be showing up and be in integrity with that in order to truly help others.
Right.
And then from there, I would 100% talk to someone else who's doing it so you can get an idea of like, is this something you really just know that like you absolutely can. There's a whole world of people out here making 6 to 7 figures, like doing the work of helping. It is not something that needs to be like undercompensated.
Right.
And you really can create a life where you have both. You can help, you can have enough money, you can have enough time. Like it really is possible. And it starts with like the mindset of believing that it's possible, and then taking those brave steps to actually create it.
Yeah. Beautiful. So before we finish up, because I'm looking at the clock and I know we're getting towards the end, I have to ask you about the Human Being Club.
Sure. So Human Being Club is one of my favorite creations, where I always talk about things, going back to that Venn diagram one last time.
Yep.
We're human beings, right? Like we're both. We're not just the human, the flesh, or not just the being. Like we have both. And so when I work with people, I end up working in both realms, because you can't really do one without the other if you want to go deep and you want to go far.
Right.
So Human Being Club is a collective of people, and it's a coaching membership. So the first week of the month, it's a human call, and it's based more on like strategy, what's happening in your life, your business, your work, like what are you trying to do, how. And then the next call is more of a being. And so this is really around like visualization, around purpose, around meditation, and kind of building up your source. So you are taking care of yourself in a way that's more than just journaling or taking a bubble bath,
right,
but really like giving your soul some time to have some space to touch in with your desires and how are they being created, and to support people in that way as well. And then we go back and forth. So they get to have both. And what happens is when people share, like we were talking about before, they get to witness other people,
right,
which when you hear someone else going through something, you take from that. And it is of service to hear that. So there's this like wave of generosity that happens where everyone is really sharing their hearts with each other. And it creates an amazing like healing community of people who are doing things in the world and taking action.
Right. So this is a club that is available to folks through you. If someone was interested in engaging with you as a coach.
It's totally virtual. It's totally digital. We meet on Wednesdays. There's a Facebook group that goes with it, and humanbeingclub.com has more information, or you're always welcome to reach out to me just to have a conversation, get to know each other, and then go from there.
Great. And if somebody was interested, Erin, in making contact with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So hello at erinlindstrom.com, or I spend a lot of time on Instagram, and my handle is at Erin Lindstrom. So if you want to see a little behind the scenes and check out my new podcast, all of that jazz, I'm over there a lot.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Mm-hmm. Well, listen, there is no question about your enthusiasm, about your energy. I'm sitting here imagining your ability with a cross section of folks to hold that space. And to be true and genuine and invite people into the challenging conversations. I urge people, if there was anything about our conversation today that piqued your interest and you have found yourself thinking about working with a coach, please give Erin a call. Again, having a sister who has worked in the financial world for many years, I know how difficult this conversation seems to be for us folks about our relationship with money. And it sounds like your guidance and wisdom would be a gift for folks around that.
Thank you so much, Keith. And thanks for having me. This has been an incredible conversation. I really appreciate it.
Great. We will, we'll pick it up again somewhere.
Sounds good.
So I urge folks to think about anywhere in your world, whether you're a helping person or not, how you hold space for people in your relationships, how you do your part to carve out that very safe space for you and another human being to spend some time in, how you listen actively, as Erin talked about, really listen deeply. And I loved what Erin said about noticing what people stay away from, not just going with what comes out of people's mouths, but this is one of the things that I think really, really skilled helping people do, which is they hear through the words. And they hear what else is in the room, or they just pick up on a certain energy of what else is in the room, and they get curious with people and invite them to maybe take a look at something that is inherently difficult. These are helping conversation skills that anybody can work on and use and bring to any relationship that you exist in. It's really one of the cool things about this kind of work for those of us that do it is it doesn't just happen in our office. It can happen in any relationship we exist in. So I hope you found today's conversation with money mindset coach Erin Lindstrom helpful, thoughtful, meaningful, gave you some things to think about. Again, please feel free to reach out to her if you have other questions about the kinds of work that she does, or maybe even find yourself thinking about that would be the coach that I would want to work with. Again, I thank you for carving out the time in your day to sit in with us, and I look forward to spending some time with you again as we continue to explore and celebrate the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation. Have a great day, everyone.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the Helping Conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation.